G'day everyone, Rune here. Now, while I am a huge fan of Pokemon, one thing that has always been hit or miss is the story of the main games. And to some degree, it makes sense. The main Pokemon games were inspired by Satoshi Tajiri's childhood hobby of bug catching, so it makes sense that the games would have a heavier focus on the Pokemon collection than the story, at least for the first games. However, with the more modern games putting a heavier focus on story, it really makes you realize that these stories are either poorly conveyed or fundamentally flawed. It is especially frustrating for a story gamer like me because even if you enjoy the gameplay, if the story makes no sense or is just bad, it can really dampen the experience. So I have decided to try my hand at giving these games some new stories that can better make use of the themes within them. Please bear in mind that these are only going to be light overviews, as I will be going over all of them up to Sword and Shield in this video, with 3 exceptions. Gen 5 will not be talked about, as my only issue with them is Ghetsis, and I couldn't think of a fix that could be extended into a full rewrite. Same with Gen 3, as Game Freak has already beaten me to the punch on that one with the remakes. I will also not be talking about Sun and Moon, as these two are my favourites and I don't want to mess with the story, though I will be talking about the Ultra games. I will also be explaining my issues with the stories of these games before talking about what I would change. As the first games in the series, these games have a very simple story, which more comes off as an excuse plot. Now, that makes complete sense, as these are the first games in the series and the story was not meant to be the focus. I also think that the simple plot of taking down an organised crime syndicate, which is just evil for evil's sake, is a fine entrance story. It does what it needs to do. However, I do still have some problems with it. For a start, the ending of the story was very vague in the first version, and in the latest iteration, the one I remember best, it's very rushed. Giovanni faces no consequences for his actions, and while yes, he does decide to turn over a new leaf, it's very sudden. The best thing I can think of to fix this is to make the fan theory of how Giovanni had been doing all of this to try and capture Mewtwo canon. Originally, Giovanni had been an investor for various projects hoped to better the world. One of these projects was the Cloning Project, which was conceived as a way to bring up the numbers of rare Pokemon, believing that the reason they were so rare is because they're endangered. This isn't the case, as they find out, but the project is still continued because of all the other uses cloning could be used for. This eventually leads to the creation of Mewtwo, who, the very day of its birth, destroys the lab and disappears to parts unknown. Giovanni, feeling responsible for this, decides to dedicate his life to finding a way to capture Mew so that it can be sealed away. This eventually leads him to taking more extreme measures until he is the mob boss we see in the game. Throughout the story, you find small hints through dialogue and book entries that this is the case, and also everything in the Pokemon Mansion. When you defeat Giovanni, he realizes that he had taken things way too far, but still worries over what Mewtwo could do, so you promise him that you will find Mewtwo. And in the post-game, you do! After capturing Mewtwo, you have the option of going back to Giovanni's gym to show him the Pokemon, and Giovanni will express shock that the Pokemon seem so soft and docile. He then realizes that Mewtwo was not a naturally destructive Pokemon and that something really bad must have happened at the lab to make it destroy it. He says that he needs some time to think everything that's happened over and that he will be handing off the gym to someone else once he finds a suitable substitute. And that's what I've got. I think this works best for what's already there, since everything aside from the last part could be done with just a few script changes. The only added scene you'd need to put in is the optional post-game interaction. Gold was the first Pokemon game I ever played, and for a while it was my favourite in the series. That being said, the story is seriously wonky. While it is interesting to see what happened to the remnants of Team Rocket after the first game, what they do has little to do with anything that's going on. Their part of the plot is inconsistent, constantly dropping in and out, and it doesn't even carry all the way through to the end, stopping just after the 7th gym. Whereas other stories have you complete the main plot just before the last gym or just before the Elite Four, with the exception of Black and White. Also, most of what Team Rocket does here isn't very, impactful? Don't get me wrong, them cutting off the Slowpoke tails is really messed up, as was the experiments they were doing on the Magikarp. But I always got the impression from how the Slowpoke moment was handled that the tails were going to grow back. And we don't even know what they were hoping to accomplish with the experiments. Honestly, Gen 2 always felt more like it was meant to be Silver's story, but it isn't framed like it is and he doesn't get enough time to shine. So, let's fix that. In this reimagining of the Gen 2 games, most of the major story beats are the same, but Silver is always present when they occur. He steals a starter from Professor Elm because, as the son of a former criminal, he doesn't think that Elm would let him have one. He's still a cold person who thinks that only strong Pokemon will be of any use to him, but in this version you get to see his reasons. As you continue the story, you and Silver will run into each other constantly as he is looking for the remnants of Team Rocket and you just keep happening to stumble upon them. You even start to work together to take them down halfway through the game. Throughout all of this, he will drop small hints in his dialogue about his father having ditched him when he was very young, and about how he kept going on and on about an insanely strong Pokemon. At the midpoint, he loses a battle to Lance, who gives him a lecture about being kinder to his Pokemon and working with them. He doesn't understand this, but after losing so many times to you and everything else, he wants to see if this is why. So when he realizes that you're there, he tells you about a Team Rocket base nearby and requests that the two of you work together to dismantle it. He says that he wants you to be the one working with him on this because you seem to come from the same school of thought as Lance and he knows that you won't slow him down. After you take down the base, he marvels at how easy it was to do before giving you some item and walking off. This continues with the two of you trading off having sparring matches and working together to stomp on Rocket until you take them out for the last time. During this, not only will Silver have a Crobat, but he will heal your Pokemon after each battle, something that he didn't previously do. After you stop Team Rocket, Silver will discover that Rocket had actually tracked down the location of his father. And this is where you discover that his father is Giovanni. He asks that you go with him to confront his father as you are his friend and he trusts you. You end up having a double battle with Giovanni and after it you find out everything that had happened in the previous game. Giovanni hadn't meant to abandon Silver, but he was blinded by his feelings of guilt and responsibility after the Mewtwo incident. And he didn't feel like he had the right to come back until after he had sorted himself out and could be the father Silver deserved. Silver's story ends with him becoming Professor Elm's assistant in order to make up for him stealing his starter. You can visit him in the post-game, where he will first give you an egg which is guaranteed to hatch into either a shiny Sneasel, the Pokemon that he is most associated with, a shiny Eevee because of Espeon and Umbreon, or a shiny of his starter. You can then talk to him anytime you want in order to have a battle with him. This here is the first generation that I'd actually owned. And not only owned, but bought with my own money. So yeah, there's a lot of nostalgia for this gen. But no love lost on the story because it was... oof. I think Tamahiro explains it best in her retro game review, linked below. Even when the Platinum version came out and fixed a lot of the glaring problems, the story still felt like it was caught between two tones, which is a problem with a lot of the Pokemon games. The story feels like it's trying to be both a dark and serious story, while at the same time being a Saturday morning cartoon. While we're at it, let's also clean up the methods that Galactic uses, because half of the stuff they do doesn't seem to connect to their end goals at all. If they were going for the crazy cult leader trying to recreate the world in his image angle, they really needed to lean into it. In this new version of events, not only would Cyrus be a lot more active in the story, but he would also be very charismatic. He'd be hitting the player with these arguments of how the world is full of pain and suffering and he wants to end that. Basically, at the start of the story, you think it's another new Giovanni situation. Someone with good intentions, but has taken things too far. Though isn't beyond saving. It also explains why people would follow him. He's charismatic and knows how to craft a message. They are trying to steal not Professor Rowan's research, but Cynthia's, as she's the one more invested in mythology. One big thing that really needs to be made obvious is that his underlings have no idea of his true end goal. Not even Saturn, Mars, and Jupiter. They all think that he's trying to lead this world to salvation, not tear apart the current world and make a new one. The moment at the Spear Pillar should be where Cyrus's true insanity comes out and his most loyal followers turn on him. Think of Light Yagami's insanity monologue at the end of Death Note and you've got an idea. After stopping him, it should be made very clear that all the members of Team Galactic were taken into custody, with the possible exception of Cyrus, who could have been swallowed up by some kind of time-space warp or something. Now, these games, along with the Ultra games in Gen 8, are the ones I had the most fun with. Gen 5 and 8 because these stories were fundamentally flawed, and the Ultra games because they had a great opportunity and just completely wasted it. For X and Y, I decided to take the legend of the ancient Warren the King and use that to create a theme of history repeating itself. So for this one, I'm going to need to start with the characters and explain the roles they are going to play before getting into the story itself. First off, I decided that it would be much more interesting if the admins of the villain team were reflections of you and your friends and vice versa. There are 5 characters including you, so I decided to use the 5-man band system, which just feels like they were supposed to be from the beginning. It works so well that you could even build how they battle you around their characterization. Look here. Trevor is the smart guy. His Pokemon are slightly underleveled when he battles you, as he's not into grinding levels. However, his Pokemon have great synergy and use a lot of smart tactics, even using held items and setups to try and beat you. He would also have the highest AI of the group. Tierno is the big guy. His Pokemon are all around the same level as yours, but they are all bulky Pokemon. They also have no status moves, as his strategy is the beginner's "I have a plan, attack." Shana is the heart. She uses a lot of Pokemon that evolve through happiness and the Pokemon are me. As such, all of her Pokemon have high affection. She would basically be the one trainer that could use the affection mechanics against you, which would probably encourage Game Freak to not make the mechanics so broken. And finally, Caleb and Serena would be the Lancer. Their particular flavor of Lancer would be the right-hand man. So their team would be built as both a complement and counter to your own. They would have Pokemon all around the same level as you and would have a diverse team that would work well together. Your own character, of course, would be the leader. Now we move on to the admin, and it is very telling that Cerebi doesn't even have them listed. As these characters have no characterization in the game, I decided to take this picture from the manga and use it as a springboard. As we can see, Xerosic is clearly the leader of the team. As Salosa has her hand on his arm in a supporting manner, I'm going to say that she's the Lancer. As for the other 3, Aliana is yawning, Mabel is growling aggressively, and Brionni is acting aloof. So I'm going to say that Mabel is the heart, Brionni is the big guy, and Aliana is the smart guy. I also want to make it clear, as these looks would not be their final design. For a start, they are all going to be in their late teens, and you will see why when we get into the story. Xerosic would be very immature and calm, often needing to break up fights between his fellow admin, but doing so with a fond smile. Celosia would be his right-hand man and would support him however she could, including dragging him away from his work because it is 2 AM and he needs to get some sleep for Arceus' sake. Mabel would be very aggressive towards you and your friends, but she is very warm and loving to the members of her team, both human and Pokemon. She even gives nicknames to her Pokemon, with a notable example being her Eevee, which later becomes a Sylveon who's called Pixie. Brioni would be a girl of few words, but her loyalty comes through in her actions, as she will always place the safety of those under her care above all else. She will mostly stand in your way as a delaying tactic in order to let others escape. Aliana is a very intelligent girl and is also the youngest of the group, which makes everyone else very protective of her. She is often seen yawning throughout the game because she has trouble sleeping because her brain is constantly going at 1,000 miles an hour. Now this would be where I explain Lysander's new characterization, but as it is intrinsically linked to the story, I will need to explain both together. In this new version of the story, Lysander is not trying to bring about the apocalypse, he is trying to do exactly what AZ had done 1,000 years ago. At the start of the story, Lysander will often be seen with Diana, and the two will often be talking about different fundraisers and other things that they're working on together in order to help with various issues around Kalos. For a good chunk of the game, it could even be argued that Lysander is the champion, as he plays a very similar role as Cynthia in Platinum. He gives you useful items, gives you advice, and once even gives you a Togepi egg. You can even visit his home, which has a garden at the back where you can catch rare Pokemon. It is also here where you hear about his wife who had passed away due to an incurable illness 20 years ago. Remember what I said about history repeating itself? Yeah. When you defeat him in Team Flare's base, he doesn't even begrudge you for it and turns the machine off as agreed before the battle, only for the process of reviving the legendary to keep going. When it becomes clear that Team Flare had miscalculated and that things are very quickly getting out of control, they start working with you to try and stop what's happening before Yveltal drains all of the life from everything in Kalos, or Xerneas' power goes so out of control that it activates the ultimate weapon. Lysander in this version of X and Y is very much the hero of his own story. You even find out that all the admins are his adopted children, and he absolutely earned that #1 dad mug he keeps in his office right next to a picture of these 5 from when they were little kids. And for those of you that think that this is too dark for a Pokemon game, the original still had that backstory of the Pokemon War, the death of AZ's Floette, the ultimate weapon, and the legendaries as the embodiments of life and death. This game was already dark. Like I said earlier, Game Freak had an amazing opportunity here and they just squandered it. Sun and Moon are currently my favourite games in the main line. This is because not only was the story willing to go dark and treat that darkness with respect, but Lily is the best thing about this game. Oh my god, her character arc is so beautiful, she made that game for me. In the Ultra games, they tried to do the bare minimum changes, and not only ruined Lily's arc, but opened so many plot holes Swiss cheese is getting jealous. If you want to make Lusamine a good guy, that's completely fine. The anime did that, and from what I've heard, a lot of people consider it the best season so far. But to do that, you need to change the story so that this change is worked in naturally. I did actually start writing a pair of fanfics a few years ago where I rewrote the Ultra games to try and improve the story. One story, titled Close the Gap, would be telling the story of the game, while its sister story, Far Away, would tell the events from the perspective of a new character who was vital to the plot. I never ended up finishing either of these, so I'm going to give the outline here. In this new version of the Ultra games, Lusamine would have 3 children, Lily, Gladion, and her new eldest, Natalie. After the loss of her husband, she would begin research into the Ultra wormholes in order to try and bring him back. However, one day an experiment would go horribly wrong, causing her to lose her eldest child, Natalie, as she falls into one of the wormholes with one of the type Nulls jumping in after her. Like in the anime, where it's the almost loss of Lily that causes Lusamine to turn away from studying the Ultra wormholes, it is this loss of her child that makes Lusamine stop. Losing Natalie makes her realize that if she continues, she could lose what little of her family she still has left. At the start of the game, instead of Lily trying to escape Ether, she is instead being seen off to the mainland by her mother. Lily, like in the original, wants to help Nebby find its way home, and Lusamine is seeing her off. It is also in this moment we hear the first mention of Natalie as Lusamine wishes that she was here to see how much Lily has grown. One major change to this story will be that Aether and Team Skull are openly working together, and Team Skull is not as much of a nuisance. Here, they are bodyguards to Aether's scientists out in the field. Gladion is still a little cold and standoffish, but here it's because he remembers the loss of his older sister. Aether is still working with Recon to try and stop Necrozma, but here, Lusamine is doing it because they promised to help her find her daughter. Here, Lily's moment of character growth comes when she becomes determined to find her sister and bring her home. The biggest change comes when you get to the altar of the Sun and Moon. Here, instead of going right to Ultra Megalopolis, we are taking full advantage of the world travel concept. I don't think Necrozma would just go to one place and stay there, that doesn't make sense. Instead, you jump to several locations that are all callbacks to previous games. The Burnt Tower, Charged Stone Cave, the Pokemon Mansion, Winding Woods, Sky Pillar, and finally, Mount Coronet. At Mount Coronet, you and Lily meet an older teen who introduces herself as Nat, the assistant to Professor Rowan. She will accompany you through the mountain and you will discover that she has a shiny Silvally, causing Lily to realize that this is her long-lost older sister. Yes, I gave her a shiny Silvally to tie over with the shiny Silvally event. When you are about to go through the portal to Ultra Megalopolis, Nat will get hurt, protecting both you and Lily from something, causing her to be unable to help you from then on. Once you get to Megalopolis, the Recon Squad will begin tending to Nat while you take care of Necrozma. After that is done, you, Lily and Nat will all head back to Alola where the family is reunited at long last. I had also thought of a post-game story which involved you finding a way to allow Nat and her friends from the Sinnoh world she'd been living in to see each other regularly. This story would end with Nat talking about alternate timelines and realities and about how there must be another world out there that was facing the same threat you had with Necrozma. She decides to send her trusted partner, the shiny Silvally named Ohana, out to these other worlds in order to lend a hand. Yes, this was entirely to explain the event because I liked when Pokemon events had stories tied to them. And now we finally come to Sword and Shield. For this one, I really had to step back and try to unravel all of the themes that Game Freak was trying to convey with this story. This took me the longest time to puzzle out and write because the way the story is told is an absolute mess. From what I can understand, it seems that the story is trying to be a critique of both old Pokemon games as well as the current debate on climate change and renewable energy. The way that all of the gym leaders are constantly telling you not to worry about the things going on and that they'll handle it feels like Game Freak trying to buck the age-old adults are useless trope. The whole story with Rose and the energy crisis feels very much like it's taking cues from the climate change debates going on right now. The argument of some saying that it's not their problem because they'll be dead by the time it really becomes obvious is echoed in the conversation between Rose and Leon. However, the way that the story is told makes it seem that the people that want to prevent climate change are crazy, reckless, and unreasonable. No! Bad Game Freak! The only characters in the story I feel were any good were the rivals, Hop, Marnie, and Bede. They actually go through character arcs, but to varying levels. Hop becoming a researcher after realizing that battles just weren't where his talents lay is a great direction to take his character, but it comes right out of nowhere. Bede getting an attitude adjustment and needing to learn humility is good, but we don't even really see it happen. Marnie is the most well-adjusted of the three, so it makes sense that she would stick to her original goal of becoming Spikemouth's next gym leader after Piers. What I decided for this story was to level the playing field between the two sides of the debate, making both sides reasonable. I also decided to make it that all of the important plot points don't happen outside of your view. What was Game Freak thinking with that? That is not good storytelling! For this new story of Sword and Shield, I'm going to need to go over each of the different stories one at a time because there are now 3 character arcs and a main plot. So I'm going to tackle the arcs first. For Hop, again, his arc will be realizing that battles just aren't something he's good at. The first thing that needs to be established is that Hop would make a good researcher. This can be done by having Hop have a lot of random trivia about Pokemon rattling around in his head, which he pulls out all the time. We also need to see him put this knowledge to use, establishing that he isn't stupid, he's just applying his smarts in the wrong place. Throughout the story, whenever you and Hop come across a Pokemon that is hurt or lost, Hop is able to quickly work out what's wrong and where the Pokemon is supposed to go. This would all establish Hop as someone that wants to help Pokemon and has the smarts to do so, making his decision to become Sonia's assistant a natural next step. For Bede, his arc will be realizing that A, he's not the only one that has talent, and B, just because someone is bad at battles doesn't mean they're useless. Bede's arc will be very much linked to his constant losses to you and Hop's own growth. While Bede is losing to you and winning against Hop constantly, he is also regularly confronted with the fact that Hop has all of this knowledge about Pokemon. He even comments at one point while watching Hop help a scared Pokemon that it baffles his mind that Hop can calm down a Pokemon with ease, but ask him to figure out a winning strategy and you might as well ask him to divide by 0. When Bede destroys the mural, it's a complete accident because he was trying to help a Pokemon and wouldn't listen to Hop's advice. Hop even berates Bede about how reckless his actions were. This moment is the wake-up call he needed and he admits that he should have listened to Hop. Marnie's story will remain the same, but her role in the story will change. Rather than just being another rival, she instead becomes more a mentor/upperclassman figure. She has more experience than you, but she doesn't rub it in your face, and she genuinely wants you to become stronger and improve. She will often pop in to give you advice, and her battles feel more like she's checking in on your progress. When you beat her in the tournament, she has a unique animation which shows her being both happy and sad. She's happy and proud of you for your victory, but she's still sad that she lost to you and that you've truly surpassed her. Finally, we come to the main story. For this rework, the biggest changes start to show when Chairman Rose shows up and the Darkest Day starts to be unraveled. Rose is actually heavily invested in discovering the truth behind the Darkest Day, as he believes that those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. During Sonia's research, she discovers that not only was the Darkest Day caused by the legendary Pokemon called Eternatus, but that the wishing stars they use for a power source were created by this same legendary. This worries Rose, who points out that the legendary is long gone and they can't make wishing stars, so eventually they're going to run out. Sonia tells him not to worry, as it would take another millennium before that happens. Rose counters by saying that doing nothing just means that they're passing the responsibility onto future generations. Generations that will have less and less time to work out a solution. Sonia assures Rose that she wasn't suggesting that they do nothing. She was simply saying that they had time to work something out. Sometime later, the first unexplainable giant Pokemon start popping up, and you work alongside Leon and anyone else who happens to be in the area to subdue them. Rose later explains that it might have been his fault, as he had found something that might be linked to Eternatus and it was reacting rather strangely to their machines when they were trying to examine it. He assures everyone that they've got it contained now and they aren't going to be poking at it again until they have every precaution set up. Just as you and Leon are about to battle, Rose comes on the big screen. The camera is shaking and there's smoke billowing up behind him. He says that this message is transmitting to every stadium in the Galar region and everyone needs to evacuate the stadiums. He says that the mysterious object that they found was actually an egg that Eternatus had been sealed inside on the Darkest Day. After being brought into the labs, it was able to draw on the energy around it to revive itself. With the Pokemon now revived, the Darkest Day is about to be repeated. This sends the message that while we do need to do something and not leave it to the next generation to clean up our mess, we also need to be careful lest we mess something up and make things worse. Instead of going immediately to Hammerlock, you instead go to the other gyms across Galar to help defeat the Gigantamax Pokemon that have appeared and help people get to safety. It is actually here where you reunite with Bede, who shows you just how much he has changed and taken everything he has learned from his interactions with you and Hop to heart. He immediately asks for both your help and shows a genuine gratitude. When you get to Hammerlock, you find an injured Rose who tells you that Leon has gone after Eternatus. He apologizes for having to ask you and Hop to fix his mess, but all of his Pokemon are too tired and weak to fight, and he's not sure he can even move. From there, not much changes, except the post-story with these two weirdos doesn't happen. Hop gets his legendary at the same time as you and decides to become Sonia's assistant after the tournament. These two were stupid, their story was stupid, get them out of here. And there you have it. This was a very long video, but I had fun. I hope you enjoyed these rough ideas of rewriting the Pokemon games. I'm Rune, and I'll see you in the next story.